Stop scrolling. Welcome back to the channel for a raw, emotional tale about power, betrayal, and a second chance that cost one man his kingdom. If you believe that karma is real and that the greatest treasure is not gold, you need to subscribe right now and give this video a like. Get ready to witness the downfall of the man who thought he was untouchable until fate delivered his own reflection. He smirked and asked, "You expect me to exchange the world for a promise?" 7 years later, he saw her again, holding the hands of two boys who were his living, breathing image. Chapter 1. The Throne of Elias Sterling. The ambient noise of London at midnight was a constant muted roar to Elias Sterling, a low frequency of power and ambition that echoed his own heart. From the panoramic glass wall of his office at Sterling Global Investments, 40 stories above the Thames, he commanded a view of everything: the illuminated city, the dark curve of the river, and the vast, competitive financial ocean he ruled. Elias hadn't inherited his world. He had forged it through ruthless efficiency and an intellect that cut like diamond. Every move was strategic, every connection optimized. There was no space for error, no tolerance for sentiment, and emphatically, no room for love. That conviction defined him 7 years ago, when Serafina Sarah Hayes stood in his sterile, expensive office, her green eyes shimmering with unshed tears. He had chosen the relentless climb over her. "You expect me to exchange the world for a promise?" He'd countered with a smile as sharp as glass. He wanted to distance himself from the vulnerability she represented. As the heavy mahogany door closed on their life together, the opulent silence of his office became a tomb for his regret. Sarah had been his only connection to humanity. She wasn't blinded by his staggering wealth or the fear his name commanded in the city. She saw the wounded boy beneath the tailored suit, the one who had clawed his way out of poverty, desperate to ensure he would never be poor or powerless again. She loved him unconditionally, and that unconditional nature terrified him. When she told him she was pregnant, his gut reaction was not joy, but sheer, primal panic, a fear of commitment, of losing independence, and of being tied to a responsibility he couldn't control. He convinced himself that she was mistaken, but in the echoing chambers of his mind, he knew the truth. He simply lacked the courage to embrace it. Following her departure, he dove into work, hoping the clamor of deals and acquisitions would silence the emptiness. His firm expanded globally, his fortune tripled, and his calendar became a dizzying blur of meetings, superficial relationships. He assured himself that he was victorious, that his choice was sound, but fleeting moments would break his composure. A flash of green in a crowd, the unexpected sound of a child's laughter in a coffee shop, or the subtle scent of lavender that she used to wear. Meanwhile, Sarah was far away, rebuilding her existence. She relocated to the serene, ancient landscape of the Scottish Highlands, where the air was crisp and the mountains stood as silent sentinels. She gave birth to twin boys, Jasper and Kit, two beautiful mirrors of the man who left her. She raised them alone, running a small local gallery library and creating stunning, atmospheric landscape paintings long after the boys were asleep. There were times she longed to contact him, to share the miracle of their sons, but the memory of his dismissive laugh kept her firmly anchored in her new, independent reality. For Elias, the relentless pursuit of power now felt like running on a treadmill. Every award, every headline, every success brought diminishing returns. His office, once a symbol of achievement, became a desolate cage. He would often sit alone, late into the night, questioning the path he took. He possessed unparalleled wealth, yet an undeniable hollow space remained in his chest. Rumors followed him, detailing his cold, emotionless drive. People respected him, feared him, and aspired to be him, but no one dared to know him. He had built psychological walls so high they obscured his own view of himself. Looking into the mirror, he saw a powerful stranger. One stormy night, he stood staring out the window, the rain lashing against the glass. Without conscious thought, he whispered her name, Serafina. The sound was foreign, belonging to another life. He violently turned away, disgusted by his own weakness. Yet, the truth was, he couldn't erase her. He knew with a deep, unsettling certainty that if their paths ever crossed again, if he ever saw the child she claimed was his, he wouldn't be able to turn away a second time. He closed his eyes and imagined a world where he had chosen differently. Did she ever think of him? Did his son have his stubbornness? He dismissed the thoughts as impossible, yet the throbbing ache in his chest was undeniable. For the first time, Elias Sterling, the man who had the world at his feet, felt truly exposed and powerless. Unbeknownst to him, fate was about to orchestrate the most humiliating meeting of his life, compelling the proudest of men to face the legacy he had rejected 7 years ago. His family. Chapter 2. The Lochside Revelation. The morning light struggled through the ancient mists blanketing the Scottish Highlands, painting the landscape in soft shades of gray and emerald. Elias was certainly not meant to be there. His life existed in the polished, regulated chaos of London, not the rugged, untamed silence of a small village near Loch Awain. He was there only due to a grueling, mandatory wellness retreat forced upon him by his executive board, who feared his relentless work ethic would kill him. He was listening to a dreadful lecture on mindfulness when an unexpected sound, a burst of genuine, uninhibited laughter, drew his attention. He turned toward the sound, his corporate guard dropping instantly. His eyes settled on a small, worn stone bench beside the loch where Sarah was sitting. She looked different, stronger, weathered by motherhood, but illuminated by an inner peace he had never possessed. She was watching 2 boys, identical in their wild energy, chasing a sheepdog across the damp grass. Then, one of them turned his head, looking directly towards Elias, the mist-filtered sunlight catching his piercing, dark brown eyes. Elias's breath hitched in his throat. The air was suddenly too thin. The boy's face, sharp features softened by childhood, was an undeniable, miniature blueprint of his own. He stood immobilized, the vastness of the Highlands suddenly feeling like a crushing weight. He hadn't seen her, hadn't dared to look, yet here was the living proof of his colossal mistake. Sarah hadn't seen him yet, and his instinct screamed, "Flee!" But a deeper, irresistible force held him captive. She finally looked up, and their gazes locked. The world blurred into a terrifying stillness. 7 years of calculated silence were suddenly deafening. Her face cycled through shock, confusion, and finally settled on a deep, cold resignation that wounded him more than any anger could. Elias walked towards her slowly, his expensive shoes sinking slightly into the soft earth with each step. He wanted to speak, to beg, but the words were trapped. She did not rise. She merely held his gaze with that steady, unsettling calm that made him feel utterly vulnerable. When he stopped before her, she spoke first, her voice low and even. "You are utterly lost. Irina's at you." The question was not an insult, but a statement of fact. "Sarah," he choked out, his throat dry. "I never knew." She cut him off with chilling finality. "You chose not to know." He tried to formulate a defense, but nothing came. The boys, Jasper and Kit, noticed the tall stranger and stopped their game. Jasper tugged on Sarah's hand and whispered, "Mum." Who was the sad man? The simple word, "Mum," hit him like a physical blow. Sarah placed her hand protectively on Jasper's shoulder. "No one important, darling. Just a man who took a wrong turn." Her gentle dismissal annihilated him. He had never pictured himself as a father, yet seeing his own features mirrored in these two perfect strangers, an earthquake shook the very core of his being. He saw not only his face in them, but a shared intensity, a tilt of the head, a gesture of stubborn focus. He wanted to plead, to explain the years of torment and regret, but the profound rejection in her eyes, mixed with the innocent curiosity of his sons, stole his voice. He left the lock side without a second word, his mind a raging tempest. The image of the three of them was branded onto his consciousness. He drove back to his secluded cabin, the beautiful Highlands landscape offering no comfort. That night, surrounded by luxury he no longer appreciated, he couldn't escape the echo of his son's innocent laughter. He didn't feel powerful. He felt utterly, completely bankrupted. He ignored his untouched bottle of vintage scotch. He looked out at the silent, misty hills. The empire he had chosen had left him hollow, and the life he had rejected was beautiful, strong, and complete without him. He finally understood that he hadn't been protecting his wealth. He had been protecting his fear of love. He made a decision that morning, a quiet, monumental commitment. He had spent 7 years running from the consequences of his arrogance, and now fate had thrown the consequences directly into his path. He knew he couldn't repair the damage, but he could no longer pretend his sons didn't exist. He had built his life on choices that made him invincible, but seeing his reflection in the eyes of 2 small boys, he knew some mistakes couldn't be buried beneath success. Interactive question. If you were Sarah, having built a beautiful life with Jasper and Kit Allen for 7 years, would you let Elias into their lives, knowing how brutally he rejected you before? Comment with your answer, yes or no, and explain the absolute first condition you would set. Activate notifications. The next chapter reveals the shocking, desperate move Elias makes to prove he's serious. Comment below. What is the single biggest, most undeniable sacrifice Elias must make to earn even a moment of Sarah's consideration? Chapter 3. The Quiet Reconstruction. The days following the encounter at Loch Elwyn unfolded in slow, agonizing waves for Elias. He understood instantly that if he wanted Sarah to believe him, he had to demonstrate his change through actions, not the grand corporate gestures he was used to. He couldn't buy forgiveness. He had to earn it. The next day, Elias did the unthinkable. He canceled his next 2 weeks of meetings in London and instructed his personal assistant to find a discreet, long-term rental near Sarah's village in the Highlands. His highly surprised lawyer was tasked with finding legal avenues to support Sarah and the boys without financial intrusion. He did not want to send money. He wanted to send a message of commitment. Elias Sterling, the man notorious for his cold, relentless pursuit of profit, was now pursuing something far more elusive: redemption. He began visiting the village park near the lochside nearly every weekend, telling himself he was merely passing through. In reality, he was observing the rhythm of their lives, standing far enough back not to intrude, but close enough to learn. Sarah always brought the same plaid blanket, the same well-worn sketchbook, and that same old thermos he remembered. There was a bittersweet poignancy in watching her. Once, he had been the center of her universe. Now, he was a ghost lingering at the edges of the beautiful, stable world she had painstakingly built from the chaos he left behind. The more he watched, the more he understood the completeness of her independence. One overcast afternoon, he couldn't resist approaching again. This time, the boys were chasing the dog near the stone bench where Sarah sat. He noticed how she smiled at them, a pure, unrestrained joy that she had once reserved for him. He walked toward her slowly, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his thick country jacket. She looked up before he spoke, her eyes narrowing slightly, devoid of the shock from their first meeting. "You are predictably persistent," she stated flatly. Her tone was weary, suggesting she had already resigned herself to his return. Elias hesitated before taking a seat on the far edge of the bench. "I just need to talk," he said. She nodded faintly, her gaze returning to Jasper and Kit. "Talk won't fix anything," she murmured. He followed her gaze and spoke quietly. "Perhaps not, but it's a starting point." They sat in silence for a long time. The boys' laughter was the only sound breaking the stillness. Elias watched them, a physical ache in his chest. Every movement, every sound felt like a reflection of the part of him he had denied. "They're incredible," he finally said. Sarah took a moment before responding, her voice low. "They're resilient. I had to ensure they would be." He turned to her, guilt radiating from him. "You did all of this alone," he stated. "I had no choice," she replied simply. He desperately wanted to apologize, but his words felt cheap against the mountain of her sacrifice. Instead, he asked gently, "What are their names?" "Jasper and Kit," she replied, the names floating softly between them. He repeated them silently, engraving them into his memory. Just then, Kit tripped over a root and fell. Before Sarah could react, Elias was already up, kneeling beside the whimpering boy. Kit looked up at him with wide brown eyes filled with confusion. "Hey, you're fine," Elias said softly, checking for scrapes. His voice, usually commanding, was gentle and calm. "That root was just trying to steal your spotlight, eh?" Kit blinked, reassured by the unusual attention. Sarah arrived moments later, breathless. Elias immediately stepped aside. "He's all right," Elias confirmed. She gave him a swift, assessing look before kneeling to check Kit herself. When she saw the small cut, she kissed his forehead. "You'll live, soldier," she whispered. Elias stood back, feeling an overwhelming lump in his throat at her simple tenderness. After the minor injury was bandaged, she stood and faced him. Her eyes held no anger now, only exhaustion. "You can't just keep showing up, Elias," she said quietly. "They don't know who you are, and I don't know how to explain it." He nodded, his voice barely a whisper. "I don't expect you to. I just need you to know I won't leave again." "You said that once," she reminded him, her gaze unwavering. "And then you did." He didn't argue. "I know, and that's why I'm here now." Later that week, Elias began finding small, quiet ways to help, always anonymously. He noticed the crumbling sign outside the small gallery. She ran and arranged for its repair. He bought new art supplies for the boys' primary school, never once mentioning it to Sarah. Sarah eventually found out, of course. She confronted him one evening outside the gallery, her expression unreadable. "You don't need to fix everything," she said, when he tried to explain the sign repair. "I'm not trying to fix it," he replied, looking her directly in the eye. "I'm trying to give back what I took." She didn't argue, but something in her eyes shifted. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was the first flicker of acceptance. That night, she reluctantly allowed him to help bring her supplies up to the small apartment above the gallery. It was modest, warm, and filled with the scent of pine and cinnamon. Jasper and Kit were drawing on the floor, their faces lighting up when they saw him. "Mom, it's the park man!" Kit yelled, innocent enthusiasm filling the small space. Elias crouched down beside them. "Hello, artists," he said softly, his heart pounding. "What are you drawing?" Jasper held up a paper proudly. "Us, me, Kit, Bana, and Mum." The picture showed 3 stick figures holding hands, drawn with messy but joyous lines. Elias noticed a blank space beside them. "And who is this space for?" he asked, pointing to the blank area. Kit shrugged. "Nobody yet. Maybe a bear." Elias smiled, but the knot in his throat was immense. Sarah watched the scene in silence. She finally saw a different man. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a genuine, painful sincerity. After the boys were in bed, she found him sitting on the sofa, staring at one of the boys' drawings pinned to the wall. She sat across from him, arms crossed. "You know," she said softly, "for a long time, I wished you would come back just so I could tell you to leave again." He looked up, meeting her gaze. "And now?" he asked. She paused, looking out the window at the quiet, snowy Highlands night. "Now I'm not sure what I want," she confessed. Elias looked at her, his voice low and steady. "Then let me stay until you figure it out." She didn't respond, but she also didn't tell him to go. Don't miss the next devastating chapter. The true price of Elias's pride that is about to be revealed as his empire begins to crumble. Comment below. If you were Sarah, having seen Elias humble himself, what one single, undeniable action would he have to take to truly begin earning your trust? Vote. Financial support, full apology, or severing all ties to London. Like this video and subscribe to ensure you don't miss Chapter 4, The Autumn Decision. Chapter 4, The Autumn Decision. Autumn arrived silently in the Highlands that year, painting the coastal village in strokes of gold and rust, and with it came a fragile sense of peace that neither Elias nor Sarah fully understood. Elias had become a quiet fixture in Sarah's life, never demanding, never overstepping, yet always present in small, consistent ways that began to soften the sharp edges between them. Sometimes he would appear at the gallery when the business was slow, ordering a coffee he never drank, just to sit at the corner table and watch her work. Initially, she ignored him, but gradually, their glances began to linger. He often helped her close up, wiping down tables or stacking the old books that always seemed to tumble off the shelves. It was strange for Sarah to watch the same man who once wore suits worth more than her annual rent, now carrying boxes and sweeping floors without complaint. He seemed entirely unconcerned by the curious stares of the locals, or what anyone in his former world might think. The arrogance that once defined him was replaced by a kind of grounding humility that disarmed her, even when she fought to maintain her resistance. One late afternoon, after closing the gallery, they walked together down the quiet street lined with flickering lampposts. The boys were asleep at home with a neighbor, and for the first time in years, they were alone without the suffocating weight of resentment between them. The air was cool, smelling faintly of approaching rain, and their footsteps echoed softly on the pavement. Sarah finally broke the silence. "Why are you really doing this, Elias?" she asked, her voice quiet, but cautiously probing. "You don't owe me anything anymore. You don't owe them either." He stopped walking and looked at her, the dim light catching in his dark eyes. "That's where you're wrong," he said softly. "I owe you everything. You offered me something real, and I threw it away because I was too afraid to face how I felt. I thought success would fill that space. It didn't." She studied him for a moment, searching for sincerity. "People don't just change like this," she said gently. He smiled, not with pride, but with a lingering sadness. "No," he agreed, "but they can try to be better." The next morning, he showed up unannounced at the boys' school for Parent-Teacher Day. Sarah hadn't asked him to come, but there he was, standing awkwardly amongst the local parents, holding a paper coffee cup. When Jasper saw him through the classroom window, he waved wildly, shouting, "Mom! The park man is here again!" Sarah felt a flash of embarrassment, but also something warmer she couldn't quite name. During one activity, the children were asked to draw their families. Jasper and Kit sat side by side, whispering and coloring with exaggerated focus. When they handed in their drawings, Sarah's heart skipped a beat. There were now 4 figures, not 3. 2 small boys, a woman, and a tall man with dark hair. "That's us," Caleb said proudly, "and that's him." He pointed to Elias, who was watching from a few steps away, unaware of what the boys were saying. Sarah felt a painful lump in her throat. She looked at her sons, their faces glowing with innocence, and realized she couldn't shield them forever from the truth of who he was. They were instinctively accepting him. Later that evening, when he walked her home, she handed him the boy's drawing without a word. He stared at it for a long time, his throat tight. "They see me as part of this," he whispered. She nodded slowly. "They see kindness," she said quietly, "and they trust kindness." He looked at her then, something profound breaking open in his expression. "I don't deserve that," he admitted. "Perhaps not," she countered. "But they don't know what you did. They only know who you are now." Her words floated between them, a fragile truth neither dared to fully grasp. Over the following weeks, she began to allow him into their lives more fully. He would pick the boys up from school when she worked late, help with homework, and even fix the broken latch on her apartment door that had been jammed for months. The boys quickly grew attached, their laughter filling the spaces that had once felt heavy and silent. Sometimes, late at night, Sarah would hear them talking about him in their room, how funny he was, how he told stories, and how he never got cross when they spilled juice on his expensive boots. These small moments twisted her heart in ways she couldn't explain. She wanted to remain angry, to cling to the past, but the walls she had built were beginning to crumble. She saw the way he looked at the boys, the quiet wonder in his eyes, and knew it wasn't just guilt bringing him back. It was love. One night, after the boys were asleep, she found him sitting on the sofa, looking at one of their drawings taped to the wall. She sat opposite him, her arms crossed. "You know," she said softly, "for a long time, I wished you would come back just so I could tell you to leave again." He offered a small, sad smile. "And now?" he asked. She hesitated before answering. "Now I'm not sure what I want." He looked at her for a long moment before answering, his voice low and firm. "Then let me stay until you find out." She didn't answer, but she didn't tell him to leave either. "Don't go anywhere." The next chapter brings the moment that changes everything. Elias faces the complete loss of his empire, a final, devastating price for his initial arrogance. Like this video, if you believe this is the only way for Elias to become a truly worthy father, and subscribe now. Comment below. Which lesson from Elias's past do you think he needs to confront the most to be a good father? His need for control or his obsession with wealth? Would you like me to continue the story from Chapter 5? Chapter 5. The Surrender of the Empire. The months that followed were characterized by slow, uncertain progress, filled with moments that felt fragile, but undeniably real. Elias didn't pressure Sarah for more. He simply stayed, enduring the difficult days, the long nights, and the quiet mornings when Jasper and Kit would clamber onto his lap to show him their drawings. For the first time in his adult life, he wasn't chasing a goal. He was just being, learning what it meant to be part of something greater than himself. Sarah watched him change, piece by piece, and though fear still lingered, a small part of her heart began to believe that maybe, just maybe, people could truly change after all. Winter arrived earlier than usual that year, blanketing the village in soft snow and muffling the sounds of the streets. Sarah had always loved this season, the stillness, the lights, the way everything looked softer under a white blanket. But this time felt different. Her small apartment was warm, filled with the aroma of cinnamon and laughter. Elias had become an accepted presence there, as natural as the sound of the boys' voices or the hum of the old kettle she used every morning. What was once awkward had slowly become familiar. He would arrive in the late afternoon, often still in his smart work trousers, his dark hair damp from the wind, and the boys would rush him, shouting his name. Sarah pretended not to watch, but every time they jumped into his arms, something in her chest tightened, a feeling she tried to ward off but could no longer ignore. He was not the same man who had left 7 years ago, and she hated that this part of her heart had begun to remember why she had loved him in the first place. One snowy evening, after a long day of sledging and hot cocoa, they all sat together near the small, crooked Christmas tree the boys had decorated. The room glowed with soft golden light, and the twins were sprawled on the rug, building a block castle. Elias watched them with quiet fascination, his elbows resting on his knees, a slight smile curving his lips. Sarah sat next to him on the sofa, holding a mug of tea, pretending to read. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "I used to think happiness looked like owning the world," he said. "Now I think it looks like this." She looked at him, unsure how to respond. There was no trace of the old arrogance in his words, only simple truth. He looked older now, quieter, the sharpness in his expression softened by something more humane. "You were right," he continued, still watching the boys. "You told me once I would lose myself chasing power. I thought you didn't understand. It turns out I understood nothing." Sarah looked down, her fingers tightening around her mug. "People say things when they are angry," she said quietly. "And you were a different person then." He turned to her slowly. "No," he countered. "I was just a coward. I couldn't handle the thought that someone might love me for who I was, not for what I built." She didn't reply immediately. Instead, she stood and walked to the window, watching the snow fall outside under the pale glow of the streetlights. The world outside was silent, almost unreal. After a long pause, she spoke quietly. "You hurt me, Elias. I don't think you ever understood how much." He stood up too, his voice rough with guilt. "I do now," he said. "Every day, I see what I missed, what I destroyed, and I can't go back. I can only try to be here now, even if it's too late." Her shoulders tensed, and for a moment she didn't turn around. "The boys love you," she finally said. "They talk about you all the time." He took a step closer, his voice trembling. "And you?" She turned then, meeting his eyes. "I'm trying to forgive you," she said softly. "But the man who left is hard to forget." He nodded slowly, accepting the truth without a defense. "I know," he said. "I don't expect you to forget. I only hope you'll let me stay long enough to prove I won't leave again." The following days were filled with a strange tenderness that neither of them acknowledged out loud. Elias began joining them for dinner more often, reading bedtime stories to the boys, and staying late enough that Sarah sometimes found herself wishing he wouldn't leave at all. Still, she kept her guard up, knowing how dangerous hope could be. Then, one evening, after the boys were asleep, she found him sitting at the kitchen table, his head in his hands. Complex financial papers spread around him. "What's wrong?" she asked quietly. He looked up, exhausted. "I'm selling the company," he said, his own words seeming to shock him. "I don't want it anymore. Not like this." She stared at him, startled. "You spent your entire life building that empire." He let out a small, tired laugh. "And for what? To sit in an empty tower pretending it mattered? I spent years collecting things that meant nothing while ignoring the one thing that did. I'm done." She was speechless. There was a finality in his voice that was both terrifying and utterly sincere. "Elias," she whispered, "you don't have to destroy everything to prove you've changed." He shook his head. "I'm not destroying it. I'm freeing myself from it. I want to live for something real." That night, they sat together in silence, the snow falling outside in slow spirals. There were no dramatic confessions, only two people sitting in the stillness after years of noise, realizing that perhaps this was what healing looked like. She picked up the mug of tea he hadn't touched and gently placed it near him. He offered a weak smile, and for a brief moment, her hand brushed his. The contact was accidental, yet it felt like a jolt, something that had been dormant for years returning to life. They didn't speak, but the silence between them felt warm for the first time. Comment the Crown if you think selling his vast corporation is the ultimate proof that Elias has changed, and subscribe to see how this ultimate saga of redemption ends. Would you like me to continue the story from Chapter 6? The Return Home? Chapter 6. The Return Home. In the days that followed Elias's monumental decision to sell his empire, Sarah noticed subtle, internal shifts within herself. The emotional walls she had spent years building no longer felt so solid. When Elias smiled, she didn't look away as quickly. When he stayed late, she didn't find reasons for him to leave. Jasper and Kit began innocently asking when the park man would move in, and she found herself unable to give them an easy dismissal. One night, while tucking them in, Jasper asked, "Mum, why do you look worried when he is happy?" She froze for a moment, then kissed his forehead. "Because sometimes happiness takes courage," she whispered. That night, when she returned to the living room, Elias was standing by the window again, looking out at the last remnants of the winter snow. He turned when he heard her footsteps. "Do you ever think about how it could have been?" he asked quietly. She hesitated, then nodded. "Sometimes. But if it hadn't happened the way it did, we wouldn't be here now." He offered a soft smile, and there was a profound relief in his eyes. "Then perhaps everything I broke was destined to bring me back to you." She stared at him for a long moment before finally whispering, "Don't make promises, Elias. Just stay." And this time, he didn't answer with words. He simply nodded, and in that silence, a lifetime of hurt finally began to heal. Spring arrived softly, almost hesitantly, across the highlands, as if testing whether the world was ready to be warm again. The snow melted, revealing new life that promised renewal, and with it came a sense of calm Sarah hadn't felt in years. The gallery was busier now. The boys had grown taller and bolder, and Elias had settled into their lives like a natural rhythm they hadn't realized they were missing. There was no formal announcement, no sudden moment when he officially became part of their household. It simply happened, quietly, as if the universe had always intended for him to find his way back. He started staying overnight more often, cooking disastrous but joyful breakfasts with the boys on weekends, fixing the small broken things in the apartment that Sarah had learned to ignore, driving them to school before heading to his meetings that now focused on philanthropy rather than profit. The walls of her life that once felt too small for her, dreams now felt like a home again, filled with laughter and the sound of 3 male voices calling out to her. Elias had completed the sale of Sterling Global Investments, a decision that rocked London but barely registered in his new life. He invested a significant portion of the money into his new foundation, dedicated to empowering single mothers and supporting arts programs in rural communities. For the first time, he felt pride in something, not because it made him powerful, but because it made him human. His measure of success was no longer defined by his balance sheet, but by the man he was when he arrived home. Sometimes he still woke up in the dead of night, haunted by the memories of the man he was, the one who scoffed when love demanded sacrifice. But then he would hear the sound of Sarah's tranquil breathing beside him, and he knew he had finally found the life he was meant to live. One warm afternoon, they all went back to the small park by Loch Awain, the same spot where he had first seen them after 7 years of silence. It looked vibrant now, or perhaps it was his perspective that had changed. The trees were full, The air smelled of grass and sunshine, and laughter resonated across the field. Jasper and Kit ran ahead with their dog, their voices bright with that carefree joy only children possess. Sarah sat on the blanket under the ancient oak tree, her smile soft and serene. When Elias reached her side, slightly out of breath from chasing the dog, he sat down and gazed at the scene. For a moment, he remained silent, afraid that speaking might shatter the perfect, fragile beauty of it all. Finally, he turned to her and said quietly, "I never thought I would be the man sitting here." She looked at him, her eyes filled with warmth. "That's because you weren't ready to be," she said softly. "You had to lose everything to understand what was truly worth keeping." They watched the boys play for a while in a comfortable silence. The past no longer hung between them like a shadow. It had softened, becoming part of their story, something that molded them, but no longer defined them. Elias reached for her hand and laced his fingers with hers. She didn't pull away. The gesture was simple, quiet, and yet held more meaning than any grand speech. "You once asked me if I thought happiness was worth the price," he said after a while. "I used to think no. Now I know it's the only thing that matters." She smiled, her thumb gently stroking his hand. "You finally stopped running," she said. He nodded. "Because I realized I was running from myself." As the sun began to set, casting a golden hue over the field, the boys returned, cheeks flushed and hair windswept. Jasper threw himself into his mother's lap, while Kit dropped beside Elias, handing him the soggy ball. "You were too slow," Kit said with mock seriousness. Elias laughed, ruffling his hair. "I'm getting old," he said. "You'll have to carry me next time." The sound of their laughter surrounded them like music, a melody of second chances and new beginnings. Meaningful conclusion. The new dynasty. That night, after the boys were asleep and the village lights twinkled below, they stood on the small balcony, gazing at the starlit sky. Sarah turned to him, her voice barely a whisper. "Do you regret the years?" He thought for a long moment, then shook his head. "No," he said, "because every mistake I made brought me here, to this exact moment, to you and to them. The true tragedy would have been never finding the way back." She smiled, her expression tender. "You sound like a man who has finally made peace with his soul." He looked at her, his expression soft and resolved. "I think I have, because peace isn't something you inherit. It's something you build brick by humble brick." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, simple silver ring, a replacement for the diamond he'd failed to offer 7 years ago. He had given her a grand life, but he hadn't given her his heart. Now, he offered the only thing that mattered, his future. "Serafina Hayes," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "I chose the wrong crown before. My empire is here. Will you marry me and let us lead this life together?" Tears welled in her eyes. "Yes, Elias, 1,000,000 times, yes." They held each other tightly under the vast, quiet sky of the highlands. The man who once scoffed at love now knew it was the only power that could save him. And the woman who once swore never to let him back in finally realized that forgiveness was her ultimate form of strength. Together, they stood in the tranquil night, surrounded by the sounds of their children's soft breathing and the steady, unbreakable rhythm of a life finally made whole. This story is the ultimate proof that the true price of pride is the loss of your soul, but the reward